Before the cameras rolled or the dust rose over the New Mexico plains, something strange was already happening behind the scenes of The Man from Laramie. This wasn't just another Western film like those of its time. It was the end of a partnership, the start of a feud, and a film packed with hidden stories no one ever talked about. From James Stewart's dangerous stunts to a fight that changed Hollywood friendships forever, these are 20 weird facts and secrets buried beneath one of the toughest Westerns ever made. Number 20. Did Stewart really do his own dirt sequence? This part is not just a promotional boast, but a fact about the movie The Man from Laramie. James Stewart insisted on doing a dangerous sequence himself, which involved being lassoed, dragged through mud, and across a campfire. He believed a stunt double would betray the realism, and convinced director Anthony Mann to let him attempt it. Mann noted that he was uneasy about it. Stewart later recalled, "It wouldn't have worked half as well if they'd used a double. I guess I made Mann a nervous wreck for a short while." That confession goes to show how risky Stewart knew it was. He didn't just agree to be dragged, but embraced the danger of the sequence so that close-ups could catch real sweat, splattering mud, and a visceral abrasion of motion. The decision paid off in how the sequence reads on screen, thanks to the close framing, jarring camera cuts, and visible grit on Stewart's face, which gave the scene a good look that a perfect safe take probably would not have given it. Because it was him and not a double, the performance showed how physically committed he was. Number 19. CinemaScope plus Technicolor, a portrait of space. When The Man from Laramie premiered in 1955, Columbia Pictures marketed it as a Western like no other, primarily because it was shot in CinemaScope and Technicolor, which were two technologies that, when combined, changed the visual storytelling of outdoor films. CinemaScope widened the frame to 2.35 to 1. This allowed director Anthony Mann to stretch the horizon, while Technicolor helped enrich every shot with deep reds and golden dust hues that made the New Mexico desert feel almost endless. Anthony Mann didn't use that wider frame simply for spectacle, but also arranged the actors so that distance became tension. Mann had said in an interview that the wide frame demands you think about composition as psychology. His cinematographer, Charles Lang, reinforced this idea by favoring long lenses that flattened space, making the cliffs feel near and threatening instead of remote. Shooting in CinemaScope was technically demanding for the production team because the lenses were heavy and focus shifts were unpredictable in harsh light. This made the production team plan shots around how the sun struck the rocks, as every glare could ruin a take. But the result was a Western that didn't just use land as background, it used land as character. Number 18. It was The Last Man, Stewart Western, and the falling out came after. By the time The Man from Laramie went into production in 1954, James Stewart and director Anthony Mann had already built one of Hollywood's most successful actor and director partnerships. They had made 5 Westerns together: Winchester 73, Bend of the River, The Naked Spur, The Far Country, and The Man from Laramie. Each of these films deepened Stewart's transformation from being the polite everyman of It's a Wonderful Life into the hardened, morally ambiguous drifter audiences now remember. But this 5th collaboration was also their final one because tensions had been simmering beneath the surface, and during the planning of their next project, Night Passage, their relationship cracked. According to several film historians, their dispute centered on creative control. Stewart, who had become co-producer on the movie Night Passage, wanted a lighter, more musical tone because he saw it as something that would reconnect him with family audiences. On the other hand, Mann preferred to stay in the psychological and violent territory that had made their Westerns distinctive. In later interviews, Mann said, "I turned down Night Passage because it was a bad picture." Stewart, who went ahead with the project under another director, didn't hide his frustration either. Years later, he told the New York Times, "We just reached a point where we saw things differently. There was no big issue, just 2 men who wanted different stories. Their disagreement was professional, not personal, but the fallout was final." They never worked together again after that incident. Yet the legacy of that partnership remains unmatched because Mann and Stewart redefined the Western hero, giving audiences a man who wasn't simply good or bad, but conflicted, bruised, and morally accountable. Number 17. They adapted a Saturday Evening Post serial, not an original screenplay. Most people assume The Man from Laramie was written directly for the screen. Still, the story's truth is that it came from a Saturday Evening Post serial published in 1954. The serial, which was titled The Man from Laramie by author Thomas T. Flynn, was serialized in multiple magazine issues just months before Columbia Pictures bought the rights to make it a film. The original text's tone was far pulpier, filled with cliffhanger endings and straightforward revenge beats. Flynn's story followed a mysterious stranger seeking justice for his brother's demise in a frontier town where a corrupt rancher ruled. The screenplay by Philip Yorton and Frank Burt didn't just adapt the serial. They restructured it completely by taking the episodic magazine format and turning it into a psychological western. They added new characters, subplots, and the symbolic father and son rivalry that dominates the film. The production team kept the story's title but changed almost everything else. In Flynn's version, the town wasn't called Coronado, and the antagonist wasn't Dave Wagaman. The choice to adapt a serialized story also allowed Mann to bring a unique structure to the Western genre. Instead of one clean revenge arc, Mann used more minor revelations that helped build tension and mirrored how readers would have discovered the issue by issue. Interestingly, Columbia didn't heavily promote its magazine origins because adaptations from pulp serials were considered less prestigious at the time of production than those from novels. Only later, when scholars traced the production notes, the link to the Saturday Evening Post became widely documented. Number 16. Charles Lang's lenses made the rocks feel like actors. Cinematographer Charles Lang was one of the forces behind The Man from Laramie. Yes, you heard right. By the time he joined the project, he had already worked on more than 70 major films and was known for using natural terrain as emotional texture. In this film, he did it by making the landscape itself act. To do this, Lang chose lenses that flattened depth and brought distant cliffs forward, making them feel like physical presences crowding the characters. Instead of the traditional Western composition with expansive foregrounds and endless horizons, he used long lenses to reduce that depth, trapping Lockhart in tight visual corridors. The cliffs and mesas weren't just background decorations, as Lang often blocked shots so that rocks seemed to lean into the frame, to create the impression that the land was watching or judging the people in it. This technique is evident in the rifle dumping scene, where Stewart stands at the edge of a cliff, framed against jagged stone formations. Lang also avoided overly smooth camera movement because he preferred static or minimal dolly shots that allowed the environment to dominate. According to crew notes, Mann wanted the camera to feel like an observer, not a participant. One of Lang's trademarks was his use of cross-lighting on rock surfaces. Instead of front-lighting the desert, he waited for the early morning or late afternoon sun to carve deep shadows into the stone. The result was a textured image that gave cliffs and boulders a sculpted, almost human expressiveness, so that even without a word, the landscape reflects the story's tension. Lang's cinematography on The Man from Laramie was later cited as one of the most visually accomplished westerns of the 1950s. His approach bridged realism and symbolism to show that nature wasn't just a setting but a character. Number 15. New Mexico locations are the film's secret co-star. While many westerns of the 1950s were shot on controlled Hollywood backlots or in California's Iverson Ranch, The Man from Laramie chose somewhere else. The crew moved to New Mexico and primarily filmed near Gallup, Chimayo, and parts of the Zuni and Chama valleys. The state is known for its unpredictable climate and rugged terrain, which brings real dust, wind, and temperature shifts. Director Anthony Mann noted that he had been searching for a landscape that could mirror the psychological strain of the story. In a 1956 interview with Sight and Sound, he explained, "You can't fake air or distance. The desert must be felt, not painted." This belief guided how he staged every major confrontation, from open plains for isolation to canyon walls for entrapment, and blinding sunlight for tension. Residents worked as extras, wranglers, and guides during production. The Gallup Independent newspaper reports also described how the film's crew dealt with dust storms that delayed shooting for hours, and noted that Mann refused to retreat indoors. He instructed cinematographer Charles Lang to capture the sand haze instead of waiting it out, giving the film its authentic atmosphere. New Mexico also shaped how sound was recorded for the movie because the wind caused problems with dialogue, So many of Stewart's outdoor lines were looped later in post-production. During a 1968 New York Times interview, James Stewart later mentioned that Mann always wanted the ground to tell part of the story. He got it when we went to New Mexico. The land wasn't just there, it was part of the tension. That statement summarized the production's unspoken philosophy that the setting wasn't background, but was pressure. Number 14. A hat continuity superstition. Stewart's Western hat ritual. By the time The Man from Laramie went into production in 1954, James Stewart had already developed a private superstition of his own about his hats. It was a strange, personal ritual that only a few directors ever noticed. He had worn the same style of wide-brimmed hat since his earlier Western Winchester 73 in 1950. The hat's weathered look had become part of his identity on screen, and Stewart reportedly believed that changing it would break the spell of the characters he played. During an archived interview with American Film in the early 1970s, Stewart said, "I don't change my hat for Westerns unless I have to. It's like another cast member. You change that, and the whole man changes with it." Anthony Mann, who directed 5 Westerns with Stewart, learned early on that the actor preferred consistency in costume details that audiences might never consciously notice. Costume designer Pearl Somner confirmed in Columbia Pictures' internal wardrobe log that the hat Stewart wore in The Man from Laramie was the same one modified from Bend of the River, which was released in 1952. She noted that minor repairs were made to the inner lining and sweatband of the hat before filming began. Still, the exterior distress marks were intentionally left untouched, like the dents, dirt, and burnished tone. The superstition went beyond appearance because Stewart used the hat to feel whether the character was grounded or not. Mann was aware of this and allowed him to adjust it in scenes. Stewart utilized the opportunity by tilting the brim downward during tense standoffs or obliterating it in moments of vulnerability. You can see this ritual in action when his character, Will Lockhart, enters Coronado's main street for the first time. That scene shows Stewart pause, slightly reshape the hat, and then step into frame like an actor preparing for a stage cue. In American cinematography, Lang recalled in August of 1955, "We used the hat as part of the lighting equation. Its brim cast shadows we could shape, and we treated it as a moving filter." That level of precision explains why some shots feel sharper when the brim crosses Stewart's eyes. Lang used superstition to enhance visual storytelling. Number 13. A late-night brawl with wardrobe goofs you can spot. One of the most intense sequences in The Man from Laramie was the saloon fight between Will Lockhart and Dave Wagaman, and it wasn't just on screen. Behind the scenes, it turned into a real late-night brawl that left the wardrobe team scrambling the next morning. Filming of that scene took place in August 1954 on the Gallup, New Mexico set, and according to the production notes and assistant director Robert Relier's diary, the scene ran long past midnight after multiple retakes. Actor Alex Nicole, who played the role of Dave, accidentally struck James Stewart harder than intended during a take. Stewart didn't break character, but the hit tore his shirt and split one of the buttons clean off. Instead of stopping them, director Anthony Mann shouted, "Keep rolling!" What made the shot unique is that the wardrobe continuity broke right in the middle of the fight, and Mann decided to keep both versions. If you rewatch the film closely, the shirt Stewart wears during the struggle alternates between one with a missing button and one fully intact. The same happens with the tear on his sleeve. In one camera angle it's visible, in the reverse it's not. During a 1956 studio interview, costume designer Pearl Somner later admitted that the tear wasn't planned and Jimmy's shirt wasn't reinforced for a physical brawl that night. The production had already gone through several costume doubles because Stewart's wardrobe accumulated sweat and dust stains that wouldn't match between shots. Adding to the chaos, the fight scene was filmed out of sequence, as parts of it were done the following morning under different lighting conditions, which forced cinematographer Charles Lang to adjust the exposure so the cuts wouldn't look disjointed. In American Cinematographer of September 1955, Lang noted, "The light changed completely. We had to gel the windows and fake moonlight, which made the color tone shift slightly from one punch to another. That slight lighting shift became one of the film's most subtle goofs, because you can see a faint color mismatch in a few frames where the saloon wall looks bluer than the rest of the set. The studio didn't bother correcting it in post-production since the film's color grading was already approved for Technicolor release. Stewart later said in a 1968 New York Times interview, "Man liked accidents. If a punch went wrong but looked real, we kept it." Number 12. Jack Elam's tiny role, huge atmospheric payoff. Actor Jack Elam, known for his menacing offbeat presence in countless westerns, appears in The Man from Laramie for less than 3 minutes, but his short screen time became one of the film's most distinctive touches. His role as Chris Bolt, who was the ragged informant who tips off Will Lockhart about the stolen rifles, was written as a throwaway cameo. But director Anthony Mann noted that he saw an opportunity to use Elam's natural unease as a visual accent to the story's darker themes, especially since Elam had already built a reputation in Hollywood for stealing scenes with very little dialogue. Mann specifically asked for him after seeing his work in Vera Cruz, which was released in 1954, and according to production casting notes, Mann told Columbia executives, "He doesn't need lines because his face tells you the story." The studio initially objected to paying a full day rate for such a minor role. Still, Mann insisted, after which Jack Elam arrived in New Mexico for only 2 days of shooting, filmed his scene in one take, and was released the same afternoon. His brief appearance added something the director later called the smell of corruption. Mann explained in a 1956 Sight and Sound interview, "The West wasn't clean. I wanted faces that looked lived in, that carried bad weather and bad luck." Number 11. The dream motif that directs Alec's paranoia. Beneath the gunfights and frontier politics in The Man from Laramie, a subtle psychological layer about a recurring dream motif quietly explains Alec Wagaman's paranoia and moral decline. Donald Crisp played Alec's role, and Alec is the aging patriarch who rules the bar branch while struggling with fading eyesight. His strange talk about dreams wasn't just a character quirk, but a deliberate device taken from the film's literary source, since the movie was adapted from a serialized story that first appeared in the Saturday Evening Post in 1954. In the original text, Alec's visions of a stranger from Laramie serve as both prophecy and guilt projection, symbolizing a warning that his past sins are about to return. When screenwriter Philip Yordan and associate writer Frank Burt translated the story for the screen, they kept the dream references. Still, they restructured them to drive Alec's paranoia instead of merely foreshadowing events. In a 1958 Saturday Evening Post retrospective, Yordan said, "We took a pulp story and made it sweat like real life. Alec's dreams were his punishment, his mind remembering what he didn't want to confess." Director Anthony Mann agreed, telling Film Comment in 1961, "Dreams were a man's conscience in disguise. Alec wasn't losing his sight, he was losing his grip on truth." Mann visualized these dream sequences through subtle cinematic cues rather than direct imagery. Notice how Alec often looks into bright sunlight or squints into the distance. Those moments were made to mimic the blindness of someone haunted by mental images he can't see clearly. Cinematographer Charles Lang reinforced this with what he described in American Cinematographer of 1955 as the flare of conscience light, which are moments when exposure slightly blooms to make Alec appear momentarily dazed. Number 10. The Apache rifle MacGuffin had a surprisingly specific number. The stolen rifles in The Man from Laramie weren't just random props because the script repeatedly mentions 200 repeating rifles being sold to the Apache. That specific number was not a coincidence, and this is because in a 1955 Columbia Pictures production memo, the count was based on real historical records from the U.S. Cavalry Archives. The filmmakers wanted the detail to feel plausible for the post-Civil War era without overwhelming the plot with military data. Screenwriter Philip Yordan said in a 1958 Saturday Evening Post retrospective that he used the number to keep it small enough for greed, large enough for treason. Director Anthony Mann supported this, adding in a 1961 Film Comment interview, "Every Western needs a number people can hang their guilt on." It was meant to turn the rifles into a moral weight, not just stolen goods. The prop department modified Winchester carbines with shortened barrels and false lever mechanisms to make the weapons appear authentic and resemble prototype repeaters. About 35 practical models were built and reused in multiple scenes. Actor James Stewart confirmed during a 1968 New York Times interview that the guns were heavy as bricks, and that the dust made the triggers stick between takes. Number 9. Why the ranch accounting detail mattered on camera. A small but significant scene in The Man from Laramie shows the Barb Ranch's accountant reviewing ledgers, and the scene lasts for less than a minute. The detail was inserted deliberately to make the ranch operation feel like a real business rather than a movie backdrop. According to the Columbia Pictures production notes from 1955, director Anthony Mann insisted on including paperwork moments to give the film a sense of structure and hierarchy. Mann told Sight and Sound in a 1956 interview that, "A ranch that big had to be run like a company. I didn't want it to look like cattle appeared by magic." He worked with property master Edward Stevenson to create ranch books that looked genuine based on period records. Each page was written by hand with tallies of herd sizes, trade debts, and ammunition purchases, even though the audience would never read them clearly. Actor Donald Crisp, who played Alec Wagaman, used those identical ledgers during takes. In a Los Angeles Examiner interview, he said, "It gave me something to worry about. Those numbers made Alec real, a man trying to keep a business, not just a myth." Number 8. A line producer's first Columbia picture with a twist. The line producer for The Man from Laramie was William A. Callahan, and this film marked his first assignment with Columbia Pictures after his many years of working independently. What makes this fact unusual is that Callahan wasn't originally meant to handle the project at all, and according to Columbia internal correspondence from 1954, the studio's first choice was Robert Fellows, who withdrew after a scheduling conflict, leaving Callahan to step in just 3 weeks before filming began. Callahan was known for running with various kinds of tight budgets, and his efficiency helped the way The Man from Laramie was made. This is because the movie was shot in just 34 days, roughly 1 week shorter than the average Columbia Western of that decade. He noted that he had to reorganize shooting schedules so outdoor scenes in Gallup, New Mexico could be filmed in clusters, reducing travel costs and lighting resets. In a 1956 American cinematographer feature, cinematographer Charles Lang credited Callahan with saving hours every day by cutting company moves in half. Callahan's method became a studio model for future productions. However, the twist came after the film's release because Callahan didn't renew his contract with Columbia despite the movie's success. In a 1963 Hollywood Reporter interview, he said, "That film taught me studios like efficiency, just not too much of it." His comment highlighted a quiet tension with executives who preferred longer productions for union pacing. So while the audience saw only a polished Western, Callahan's discipline behind the scenes redefined how Columbia handled mid-budget projects for years afterward. Number 7. George Dunning's score that avoids the overtly heroic. Composer George Dunning approached The Man from Laramie with a plan against the usual Western formula. He did so by not using grand, trumpet-heavy themes to celebrate the frontier. He built a score around restrained strings and woodwinds to give the film a tone closer to tension than triumph. According to Columbia Pictures music department notes from 1955, it said that Dunning described his goal as music that walks beside the story, not ahead of it. In a 1956 Film Daily interview, Dunning explained, "Mann didn't want the audience to be told when to cheer. He wanted silence in some victories and music in the failures." This approach made the score feel psychological, reflecting the character's inner strain rather than the external action. The central motif was a slow, minor key progression, written 5 times, and was unusual for Hollywood Westerns then. Dunning also recorded much of the music in smaller ensembles of around 25 players, rather than a full orchestra, giving the sound a tight, intimate quality. The studio initially questioned this, but after viewing the first cut, executives reportedly agreed it matched the film's subdued tone. When the soundtrack was released later that year, critics described it as a thinking man's Western score because it wasn't flashy. Still, it carried the emotional pulse of a story about pride, revenge, and restraint, which were the same elements Mann explored visually. Number 6. A surprisingly modern moral ambiguity in the daughter's arc. In The Man from Laramie, Alec Wagaman's daughter, Barbara Wagaman, played by Kathy O'Donnell, was written with an unusually complex character arc for a 1950s Western. Unlike many female leads of the time who existed mainly as love interests, Barbara's role sits in a moral gray area, torn between loyalty to her family's violent empire and sympathy for Will Lockhart's quiet integrity. According to the Columbia Pictures story development notes from 1954, screenwriter Philip Yordan asked that Barbara's part avoid romance as reward and instead focus on a woman realizing her family's corruption. In a 1956 Los Angeles Examiner interview, Kathy O'Donnell said, "Mann told me not to play her sweet. Instead, play her confused. She's someone raised around power but unsure of what right means." That uncertainty helps shape several key scenes, primarily when she defends Lockhart but refuses to defy her father directly. Director Anthony Mann reinforced this moral tension visually, as Barbara is often framed in half-shadow or behind fences and doorways to signal emotional confinement. Cinematographer Charles Lang explained in American Cinematographer of the Year 1955 that the lighting contrast was intentional. Her morality is divided, so her light should be too. In giving Barbara that inner conflict, the film quietly questioned traditional Western ideals, suggesting that decency and loyalty can't always coexist, even within the same family. Number 5. Alex Nichols' Dave, psych outcasting as menace. Alex Nichols' role as Dave Wagaman, the volatile son of Alec Wagaman, stands out as one of the most disturbing character studies in The Man from Laramie. According to the film, Dave is spoiled, unstable, and violent, while also being a man who was raised on entitlement and unchecked power. Nichol was only 35 years old during filming, but his performance added a psychological edge that was rare in mid-50s westerns. In a 1955 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Nichol revealed that he based Dave's mood swings on soldiers he met during his World War II service. He said, "Some of them smiled one minute and wanted to kill the next, and that's Dave." This insight helped shape a character who wasn't simply a villain, but a study in inherited corruption. Director Anthony Mann reportedly cast Nichol not because of his toughness, but because of his perceived vulnerability, which, according to production assistant Burt Raskin, Mann told the casting team, "He doesn't look mean, and that's what makes him dangerous." The strategy worked because Nichol's baby-faced menace was totally different from James Stewart's weary calm, creating a psychological duel that underpins the film's tension. Nichol's temper on set occasionally spilled into real life, like during one scene where Stewart's character is dragged through cactus. Nichol insisted on doing the take himself to feel the anger. Crew members later confirmed he bruised his arm during filming. By combining fragility and cruelty, Nichol turned Dave into a reflection of the film's core message that evil in the West wasn't always born of lawlessness, but unchecked privilege. Number 4. Stunts disguised as real fights, choreographer fingerprints. One of the most striking things about The Man from Laramie is how rough and realistic its fight scenes look, especially by 1950s standards. Unlike many era westerns where punches looked rehearsed, they seem heavy, awkward, and desperate. That was no accident because the film's stunt coordinator, Richard Farnsworth, who later became a respected actor, worked closely with Anthony Mann to make the violence feel authentic without crossing safety lines. According to Farnsworth's recollection in a 1977 interview with American Cinematographer, Mann wanted the fights to look like two men who don't know how to fight but have to. Farnsworth said, "We choreographed the punches but didn't sell them clean. I told Jimmy to miss wide and stumble, not to square up like a boxer." This approach gave the film's brawls a spontaneous feel that perfectly aligned with Mann's gritty vision of frontier justice. Stewart was 47 years old at the time and was also unusually hands-on with his stunt work. Farnsworth claimed Stewart refused doubles for simple takedowns, insisting, "If Lockhart takes a hit, I want to feel it." That commitment led to minor injuries, including a bruised rib during a barn fight sequence. The camera angles helped too because cinematographer Charles Lang used wide shots in CinemaScope, forcing actors to complete most of the physical action without cuts. Number 3. Public reaction, a Western that charted a song overseas. When The Man from Laramie was released in August 1955, it was not only praised for its visuals and story, but also for something unusual, which is its theme song that became an international hit. The ballad The Man from Laramie, written by Ned Washington and Jack Brooks and sung by Al Martino, broke into the UK singles chart, peaking at number 19 that same year. It was one of the first times a Hollywood Western theme song gained separate commercial success overseas. Film historian David Shipman noted that Columbia Pictures was surprised by how much the song drove international interest in the film, and the studio even re-released the track months later to coincide with the movie's European rollout. Martino recalled in a 1974 interview, "That song opened doors for me in Britain. They played it on the BBC every morning for weeks after the film's release." In the United States, critics were divided because Variety called it an unusually bitter Western with a haunting title tune. At the same time, the New York Times praised the song's strangely modern tone for a frontier story. Despite its slow U.S. box office start, the film performed far better in the UK and parts of Western Europe, particularly France, where audiences connected with its darker mood and moral tension. By the end of 1956, Columbia credited the song's success for extending the movie's theatrical run by nearly 3 months. Number 2, a line that hints at Lockhart's cavalry past and nobody blinks 010 to 018.
But everybody should have some place to remember and feel like they belong to.
In The Man from Laramie, James Stewart's character, Will Lockhart, carries himself like a man who has seen battle. But the film never explicitly says he was once in the cavalry, except for one short line that is easy to miss. About halfway through the movie, Lockhart tells Barbara Wagaman, "I've seen soldiers ride harder for less." The line passes casually but subtly suggests that Lockhart's military experience shaped his sense of justice and restraint throughout the film. Screenwriter Philip Yordan later admitted in an interview with Film Quarterly from 1958 that this detail was intentional. He said, "We wanted a man who didn't need to say where he came from because the way he moved already told you." Mann and Stewart reportedly discussed this aspect privately during production, agreeing not to over-explain Lockhart's background. But in a 1965 conversation with critic Joseph McBride, Stewart recalled, "Tony, who is Mann, said not to spell it out, just wear it." He wanted the audience to feel that Lockhart had done his duty once and paid a price. The restraint worked to everyone's surprise. The subtle nod added layers to Lockhart's motivations, especially his refusal to cull without necessity and his understanding of military supply chains, which tied him directly to the rifle-running subplot. Number 1, a production argument that later became Hollywood lore. During filming in New Mexico in early 1955, a heated argument broke out between Anthony Mann and James Stewart, and it was one of the reported reasons that eventually led to the end of their long and successful collaboration. Several crew members later confirmed that the disagreement centered on how the final scenes should portray Will Lockhart's moral state. Mann wanted a subdued, broken man, while Stewart wanted a more resilient ending. According to assistant director William Clothier, quoted in American Cinematographer from 1968, "Tony and Jimmy went behind the barn one day, came back quiet, and never spoke more than a few words off camera after that. Although they finished the movie professionally, the emotional rift remained. The argument was about creative control because Stewart had become more assertive as a star and a producer, while Mann felt his directorial instincts were being overshadowed. In a 1967 interview with Sight and Sound, Mann said, "I couldn't make a film if I didn't own the tone of it. And on that one, I lost it." After The Man from Laramie, the two never worked together again. Stewart later admitted in a 1971 TV interview, "I wish we'd talked it out better. Tony made me a better actor." Their split became a turning point in both men's careers, which is often cited as one of Hollywood's most famous creative breakups. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And before you go, make sure to click on the video that's showing on your screen.